Morning. This wonderful railroad station that was built and came online in 1910, actually the time of Newbern's 200th anniversary celebration. And it's a wonderful building that represents a great part of Newbern's history. This station was in many ways the high point, and for the next couple of decades was a center of commercial activity. Joining me here at Union Station at this wonderful building is Dallas Blackiston, who's the past president of the Newbern Preservation Foundation and has been a great leader in the efforts to restore this building to its original grandeur. And Dallas, I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Certainly, Nelson. In early 2009, the Board of Directors of the Newbern Preservation Foundation renewed its long-standing efforts to try to save this building, preserve and protect it as one of Newbern's very important vintage structures that tell so much about the economic development of Craven County, Newbern, and eastern North Carolina. Owned by North Carolina Railroad, we undertook this effort that had been a dream of Newbern citizens for over 25 years to put it back to useful purpose. Unfortunately, passenger service stopped here in the early 1950s. It was used from that point on into the early 80s as a part-time maintenance and freight storage building. And since then it has been neglected and unused. So our purpose is to try to get it back in good condition and use it as a tourist destination center, as well as a working office complex for many purposes in Newbern. And we currently have a joint working group that was established in August of 2010, combined with the City of Newbern, North Carolina representatives, Norfolk Southern, some ad hoc members, and of course Newbern Preservation Foundation, to work towards common goals to restore, rehabilitate. And the first item of business is to redo the roof structures, particularly the ones on the one-story inn units that have fallen into a very bad state of repair. Both inn units are hip roofs, and that design contributed to problems with the roofs getting in the condition they're in now. The original roof, as we understand it from photographs, was terracotta clay tiles, and over a number of years those tiles became cracked or broken, but the shape of the roofs caused water to run back towards the center section of the building, and that water collected there and started to cause decay and deterioration of the roof framing itself inside. The story began when this two-story building was constructed to replace an older and smaller wood frame structure. It was placed into service by the Atlantic Coast Line and Norfolk Southern Railways on property owned by the North Carolina Railroad. It provided both freight, passenger, and mail service to points north and west, as well as housing administrative offices for railroad staff and management, starting in 1910. Ultimately, it soon became a major shipping point for eastern North Carolina goods and services, including fishing, tobacco, and timber products. During its history, the North Carolina Railroad, the current owner of the building, has played a major role in the economic development of eastern North Carolina. With 2 stories and 7,500 square feet of space, the depot was divided into separate passenger waiting rooms for passengers downstairs, as well as a freight office on the north end. There were track platforms and canopies facing both the west and southern track crossings. But the history and significance of this building goes beyond North Carolina. Shortly after its construction, America became involved in World War I, the war to end all wars. During both World War I and later World War II, America's railroads and depots, similar to Newbern's Union Station, became major shipping points for personnel and materiel that were moved to training and embarkation centers on the east and west coast for movement overseas. There was no interstate highway system in the early 1900s, and so America's railroads became a major factor in winning the wars. The railroads in this country have undergone a major revitalization because of the impact of rising fuel prices and the cost of shipping freight and cargo. And as many folks know, you can move 1 ton of freight over 400 miles with 1 gallon of fuel on rail lines. And that's a very significant cost savings in today's transportation industry, to be able to move freight longer distances through various modes, intermodal, multimodal means, and that acknowledges the history that the railroads have played in this country's development, our safety and our security over the last 200 years. Even though active passenger service was discontinued in the early 1950s, the depot is important as a source for educating younger generations on the role railroads have played in the development and security of America. This depot is also significant because of its key location on the Hancock and Queen Street corridors. Once refurbished, the depot will play a major role in the redevelopment of the entire River Station waterfront district where many timber, tobacco, fertilizer, and oil businesses were once located. Eventually, we hope to have a Rail Heritage Museum Center located in the North End Freight Room with photographs, memorabilia, and a live HO-scale model railroad diorama. Additionally, there will be rental office spaces upstairs and more public spaces and galleries downstairs. The goal of the depot's joint working group that was formed in August of 2010 is to once again have Union Station serve as a tourist destination and business center for the citizens of New Bern and visitors from all over North Carolina and the eastern United States. Well, the importance of this building is that everybody has a railroad or train story somewhere in their past. And hopefully those memories are very positive, but they concern going someplace or coming from someplace or meeting someone who was coming to see them. I can remember taking trips with my mother and my sister years ago to go back home after visiting grandparents. I have ridden the train from Miami all the way to Boston at various times, and a lot of people have done that. And things have changed, but the more they change sometimes, the more they stay the same. Rail is here, and this building is important in terms of revitalization and recognizing the history of New Bern and to all of North Carolina. This whole area can be revitalized with this very important anchor building here at this key location.
You know, Dallas, that it's so important to remember that this area, even in my boyhood, when I was a young boy in the early 50s, there were still many vestiges of the important commercial interest in this area, and there are still some buildings that remain. Pennick's Drug Store, which was built in 1930, and again was placed here because this was a very vibrant commercial area. Most significantly, perhaps, the Roan Hotel, which was built by Henrietta Roan in 1923, just a year after the Great Fire, and became an important hotel for the African American community. We were fully in the days of segregation at that point, and Henrietta Roan had the courage and foresight to build a facility that was available to African American passengers who would come in on the railroad. By the way, as you know, her sister Charlotte Roan, who lived in the hotel there with her, was probably the first black registered nurse in the state of North Carolina. So that's an important landmark. Those buildings are still here. Most of the commercial buildings, including another large hotel that were here, are long gone. But your efforts will be instrumental in returning this area to an identity that's centered on this rail traffic, both freight and passenger rail. These very tracks are the ones on which many people fled New Bern in 1862 after the Union Army began to occupy this area. So we could hardly be in a more historic part of New Bern. As we were saying, this is was a wonderful commercial neighborhood, and one of the structures that remains. Mr. Pennick's, who had built this drugstore in 1930, had the good sense to put a soda fountain in there, one of the finest soda fountains I've ever seen. It was all marble and had great brass fixtures, and But what was wonderful was to come over here. My favorite was to come here for a chocolate ribbon ice cream cone. 2 scoops of chocolate ribbon ice cream at that marble counter, or going and sitting at one of the little ice cream tables. It just doesn't get any better than that.
Absolutely not. I have great memories of ice cream at a corner drugstore as a child.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Indeed. You know, this is such a wonderful area and such a wonderful project, but it's going to take the efforts of many, many people, the contributions of many, many people to make this dream into a reality. And Dallas, I'd love to hear a little more about how it's going to happen.
Well, Nelson, you're absolutely correct. It takes money, but we don't believe that good ideas have to be prohibitively expensive. There is grant funding that will be available for this project to start on the roof replacement and rebuilding of that. And there will be a partnership here, both public and private, that we can push forward with. And we believe that that's important. And with the help of Scott Saylor and his staff at North Carolina Railroad, Norfolk Southern, Preservation Foundation, the City of New Bern, and all the other supporters that we have, this is a wonderful project that not only speaks to the history of New Bern, its economic development, but it also speaks to the future of New Bern and where we want to go as a community. We feel that is very important. The Joint Working Group is committed to this. We want to turn this into a visitation destination center, as well as useful workspaces, and have a rail heritage museum at the north end where children and families can come and learn about the history of North Carolina Railroad, Norfolk Southern, and all the other entities that came together in New Bern to make this such a great place to live and work.
So let me stop.
Do you know what time it is? It's railroad time, and everyone has a train story to share, and we want to know your story. All aboard.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Newbernian, and I hope you'll join us next time when we talk about some of the strong women leaders in New Bern's past.